Rosa Bonheur's life and artistic career both were quite unusual for a woman in the 19th century. Since her family believed in equal upbringing, Bonheur and her sisters received an education equal to that of her brothers. Early on, she refused to be reduced to the typical female subject matters such as portraiture or still life painting. Here is a little reminder. During the early modern period in Western art, women were typically not allowed to receive an education in the arts. Only if a family member, most often the father, was an artist, girls were able to pick up some of the technical knowledge on the trade. The number of women artists was therefore small. Often there were no brothers around, and the painter dad would bestow his knowledge on his daughters to be able to reach at least somehow into the next generation. This was the case, for example, for Artemisia Gentileschi, or at first for Sophonisba Anguissola, until the latter's baby brother was born. In other cases, the talent of a daughter was recognized early on, for example that of Elisabetta Sirani. Be that as it may, getting any sort of education in this field was always an uphill battle for women. Once trained, however, there were very few subject matters deemed suitable for a lady painter. Fresco painting was out of the question, namely for two reasons. First, it was the most difficult domain in the realm of painting. Often, painters used it as a type of competition to determine the better artist. A great example was the fresco duel between Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo in the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence in 1504. In a way, fresco painting was the most macho technique and therefore not suitable for women. Secondly, there were much more practical reasons why a fresco was not done by a woman. She would have had to climb on a scaffolding, and anybody could have upskirted her. A proper lady would never behave in such a way. So, no fresco painting for women. Large-scale history paintings were typically done by the first-rate artists, all of them male. So also here, no women. Large-scale paintings in general were normally not done by women because of the cost of materials. And history paintings would often include nudity or violent and bloody scenes. All these things were nothing a lady painter could venture into without risking a scandal. But by the later part of the 18th century, some women had distinguished themselves in the arts, even in the most important domain of history painting, and a handful were even admitted as members to the powerful academies, for example, Angelica Kauffmann. Rosa Bonheur was aware of these limitations and actively leaned against these customs. She wanted to study human anatomy. Human anatomy lessons were out of the question for females. There were no female doctors around. The female psyche was deemed too delicate for such fleshy subjects, but animal anatomy was a different story. Bonheur, as well as most of her siblings, found animals fascinating. At age 14, she started to copy paintings at the Louvre and became what is known in French as an animalière, a female painter of animals. During her studies, she visited slaughterhouses in an attempt to increase the accuracy of her animal anatomies. In 1849, she received a government commission to paint Ploughing in the Nibernae. In it, showing several pairs of oxen ploughing parallel to the picture plane and up a slight incline in front of an endless horizon. Most surprising is the anatomic accuracy and stark realism with which not only the animals, but also their handlers and the entire landscape are rendered. On 2 occasions, Bonheur painted at the horse market for half a year. For this endeavor, she obtained a police permit to dress as a man, so as to not draw attention to herself. Bonheur often wore men's clothing, partially because of her handling of animals. It would have been considered rational dress in such an instance, and partially because she was an openly lesbian woman who used her clothing as a means of personal expression. Bonheur associated men's clothing with power, freedom, and choice, all qualities females at the time generally had very little of. She lived with her first partner, Nathalie Mikas, for 40 years and was the breadwinner of the two. Lengthy studies resulted into one of her most famous paintings, The Horse Fair, from 1852 to 1855. The painting is unusually large and measures more than 16 feet in width. Shown are horses in various poses and the men trying to control them. The animals were work horses to do labor on farms. They are not thoroughbred stallions, usually seen in the stables of the French aristocracy. Here we see heavily muscled animals, slightly unnerved by the busy environment. It is a panoramic composition of almost cinemascope-like dimensions that evokes romantic sentiment in the viewer. We are reminded of the Panathenaic friezes or Roman processions, but unlike these predecessors, we see working-class animals depicted in an almost religiously heightened manner in front of a seemingly endless horizon. The Horse Fair became one of the most popular paintings of the 19th century and was widely reproduced. One noticeable skill in many of her paintings is her handling of midday light. Often we see dark cast shadows, or, on occasion, even light that comes straight at the viewer. This interest in the accurate depiction of daylight is a phenomenon of realism, and the fact that colored preparatory studies were now possible thanks to the invention of paint in tubes around the middle of the century.